What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we finally got some details on Destiny's weapon tuning that we'll be seeing before Rise of Iron drops. This is specifically for weapon tuning and not for class balancing. Whether we'll see that or not remains to be seen, but these changes will go into effect in update 2.4.0, which will go live after the maintenance today. So we're just going to go through the list, see what the changes are, and have a few quick thoughts about them. So we'll start with the xHOUNDISHx Fabian strategy. So kills with the weapon will now automatically load a portion of the magazine, which is pretty cool. They've increased the base range by 16% and stability by 44%. That is a pretty reasonable buff right there. It's going to be interesting to see how it handles and if it feels any better or more effective, but it certainly sounds promising and it's something that is pretty welcome change. We have Thorn right here. So the strengths of Thorn are damage over time, of course. It's the fastest rate of fire family of hand cannons, and it's also effectively best in class level range with Send It On. So it has some very good range on it. And to avoid a repeat of year one, we decided to remove one of those elements from the equation. They will be reducing Thorn's base range by 25%, which is a pretty interesting change right there. It did have very good base range, so that is certainly welcomed. We'll see how it handles in the Crucible. Universal remote. So they talk about how it's a very effective weapon combined with some of the mobility options in the game, and what they're going to do is reduce the range bonus, which is given by the exotic perk, not the range on the weapon overall, but the bonus range that you get with the perk, and that's going to be reduced by 75%. So that no longer guarantees that you'll have a maximum shotgun range when that perk is active. They've also increased the rate of fire, which actually lowers damage as a secondary effect. So it's going to have less damage and certainly less range as far as that bonus goes. This is a really interesting change, definitely something that a lot of people will welcome, and we'll see how it plays out. Dreg's Promise. They've increased the damage by 8% and they've increased the magazine size by 3. So this may make the weapon, you know, somewhat more utilizable in the game and somewhat more popular, especially with more sidearms coming inside of Rise of Iron. So Touch of Malice. This is a really interesting one that I wasn't really anticipating. Basically, the self-damage inflicted when Touch of Malice starts taking your health will now remove the Blessing of Light buff, and this is really interesting. Perhaps somewhere in the new raid they foresaw that this could be a super effective way of killing a boss. That's a very interesting thing, and it's going to be interesting running King's Fall and seeing how those changes affect that. Boolean Gemini. So they've added an intrinsic perk of high caliber rounds. So I believe this won't be a perk that you can see on the weapon, but very similar to the minor multi-tool had high caliber rounds. Boolean Gemini will now have high caliber rounds, which is really interesting actually. I'm really looking forward in particular to trying this out and seeing how it handles in the Crucible. No Time to Explain has an intrinsic perk added, which is Headseeker. So again, I don't think it will display on the weapon, but the effect will actually be there on the weapon. So Headseeker, that could definitely be an interesting one for No Time to Explain. So sniper rifles, and they're talking particularly about the mid-high impact family of sniper rifles, you know, things like 1000 yard, the longbow synthesis. So they evaluate the benefits. Decent magazine sizes combined with strong impact provide strong DPS. Strong target acquisition when combined with hidden hand can reach the upper echelon normally reserved for the lower impact sniper rifles like Wayland's March. The ability to take down a guardian wall in their super state, high body shot damage with a rate of fire still fast enough that 2-tap body shots are a viable thing. The resulting sniper rifle has all the strength of the other families but without the drawbacks, and to spread the power a bit they've touched on 2 elements. So they've reduced the damage on the mid-high impact, so 1000 yard snipers, by 6.95%. So when you body shot someone, you're going to do a little bit less. Headshot damage will also be less, which we'll talk about in just a second. No Line Beyond will not be affected by the change, but they've also reduced the target acquisition for the LDR and the longbow specifically to bring them in line with other snipers in the same family. So these won't be as effective as they were. And as a result of this, of course, Black Spindle will be a more interesting weapon to take down supers because it has more impact. And they are actually reducing the damage, so you won't get some of those one-shots on Sunbreakers perhaps, or something like that, with that reduction in damage right there, which is a really interesting change. Now they talk about aim deflection. You get the drop on an enemy sniper, reducing him down to a pixel of his life, and right before you pull your trigger for the last bullet to exit your scout rifle's chamber, you see a glint and hear the sound of your head turning into mush. You raise your fist in the air and release a silent scream so as not to wake the baby. So with these changes, changes, we want to give your primary weapon a better chance at consistently beating sniper rifles. So they've increased the starting strength for aim deflection, aka flinch, when players take damage while scoped in from 30% up to 50%. And with every subsequent hit, the strength of deflection increases until you hit 100%, which is the max deflection. Overall sniper ADS aim deflection multiplier has been increased to 1.9% and it was 1.85%. So that's a really interesting change right there. It's a very technical way to describe it, but essentially you should have a few less of those frustrating situations where you feel like you should be winning a gunfight and you suddenly lose one, essentially to flinch. So that is a very interesting thing right there. They have spoke about a bug right here, fixed an issue where Irene UI stat bar showed an incorrect rate of fire. So now they're talking about more generic weapon changes, and this one's an interesting thing. So middle rate of fire autos receive a small damage boost to help with the damage fall off, but the resulting damage does not drastically change as time to kill. So they've reduced the maximum magazine size for the highest rate of fire auto rifles, things like the doctrine of passing, and they've increased damage to middle rate of fire autos by 1.5%, which is really interesting that they're not talking about the lower rate of fire auto rifles, but it should make things like Hakon's hatchet and that variety of auto rifles feel, you know, a teeny bit better, at least in the Crucible. So I'm all down for that. Shotguns. So they're talking about some specific things right here. Mobius, which is the Titan specific shotgun, decreased spread on the Titan class shotgun in ADS, 0.1% zoom factor increase. So they've increased the base stability by 60%, which is interesting. They've reduced the spread angle penalty on shotguns with the full auto perk. Invective has not been effective, so that's good, otherwise Invective would be really quite offensive right now. They've increased the high rate of fire and middle low rate of fire shotgun damages by 2%, so that could be pretty interesting. See if any of those kind of push back into the meta a little bit. On the whole, I don't think it's going to change the shotgun game very much. Pulse rifles. So they've increased the rate of fire for the Hake pulse rifle Ludmila D, which is the lowest rate of fire archetype and the highest impact for pulse rifles. So that one in particular has had an increased rate of fire. They've also added a minor increase of 2% base damage for the middle rate of fire family of pulse rifles, so Nerwin's Mercy. So essentially your Nerwin's Mercy, Red Death archetypes have had a 2% damage buff, which is interesting. We'll see how that feels in the Crucible. I'm all for buffing those particular weapons. So now on to sidearms. They had to say that when they evaluated player data across the game, they could see that sidearms were being underutilized, and with 2.4.0 they aim to change that by pushing sidearms to shoot further, faster and more predictably. So there's a few technical things right here, we'll just go through them. They've unified damage for all sidearm types, so they all do the same damage now. They've increased damage for existing Hake sidearm families by 3% for the lowest rate of fire and 7% for the highest rate of fire within that Hake sidearm family. They've decreased damage for non-hit scan sidearms by 5%, so that's Vestian Dynasty and Queen's Choice, which were particularly effective weapons. There's been a minor extension of damage fall-off point for sidearms across the board, which is plus 0.5 meters. A minor increase of stability for sidearms across the board. A added damage bonus in PvE of 20 to 30% depending on the combatant tier, so whether it's a Dreg or a Captain, for example. To accommodate 2 new faster firing sidearm families in Rise of Iron, all current sidearm rate of fire bars will be slightly shorter, and this is just so that they can have more bar space to display that rate of fire differentiation, and this does not change the actual rate of fire, it's just a stat bar representation. So that is a pretty healthy and pretty large change to sidearms overall. I think this is really interesting, and we could definitely see more sidearms, and this PvE change as well is very welcomed because they just weren't that useful in PvE content. So that is really good, really happy to hear about that. So they're talking about rocket launchers right here, and they're also talking about grenades and horseshoes and how it's such a popular perk. And so by making cluster bomb more reliable and grenades and horseshoes less effective, which is the plan, we hope to mix up the rocket launcher perk selection and inject a bit more technique into the archetype. So they've increased the effective range on the explosions for cluster bombs, and grenades and horseshoes perk activation radius has been reduced again. I think they changed that back in the Taken King by 1.3 minus 1 meter. meters, so essentially they won't detonate as easily. And then truth has not been affected by this change, so truth is still going to be as effective as it is right now, which is, you know, still a very popular choice in general. So for machine guns, they're just increasing the damage on the highest rate of fire machine guns by 4%. So there's one from the Vanguard. Some of the faction machine guns have higher rate of fires, I think. So yeah, that's a pretty welcome change. I don't think anything else really needed to change. The higher rate of fires don't see as much use, so this is definitely a positive change. As far as hand cannons go, we'll only see small bug fixes right now. However, as a preview to Rise of Iron, newly minted low rate of fire hand cannons have a higher maximum possible range stat, giving players a distinct reason to choose that type of weapon. So they fixed an issue where the hand cannon Zali's Bane rate of fire would display incorrectly as a stat, and they fixed an issue where the Taken King Vanguard and Arms Day hand cannon, so that's down and out, and the Kumakatok, it's all the Omalon types, they basically will now display the correct stats. As far as fusion rifles go, small bug fixes again. Accelerated coils correctly reflects damage reduction now that the UI, now on the UI stat bars. No change to the gameplay effect, UI only. They've also fixed an issue where stat bars on Techie and Rage displayed incorrectly. And now there's a few things that they wanted to talk about as far as perks goes, a few buffs and changes based on data they've received over the past year. So now the Taken Knee bonus will activate after 0.5 seconds of crouching. They've added flinch reduction of 25% and increased aim down sight speed by 25% with the perk active. Exhumed has added an extra 5 seconds, 15 seconds total of that perk being active now when it does proc. Cascade, so functional charge, your melee kills automatically reload a portion of the magazine. Surplus now increases carried ammo capacity. Grave Robber increased activation chance by 25% from 20%. Guerrilla Fighter increased stability and range bonuses by 200%. Think of it as a bonus hammer forged and perfect balance when the perk activates. That's very interesting. As far as magazine perks now give range bonuses. They removed impact stat bonuses that had no effect on the base damage and only were shown in the UI. Armor piercing rounds adds +4 range and reduces -4 handling. High caliber rounds adds +3 range and reduces -5 handling. Skip rounds adds +5 range and reduces -3 handling, as well as adding +5 recovery. Unflinching, they've decreased the efficiency of the perk from 25% flinch reduction to 15% flinch reduction. That's a very interesting one right there. As a final note, sometimes there are bugs that require a more careful rollout that can be achieved through a smaller update. The stakes are much higher when the issue lies deep within the foundation of Destiny's engine. This bug has been fixed. This bug has been an incredibly difficult one to fix and test. We hope that we got it this time. And this is Firefly. So they've got a possible fix for the crash related to special effects triggered by the Firefly perk. So hopefully we won't be crashing our game by blowing up heads anymore. But that is everything for the update 2.4.0 weapons balancing preview. So there's quite a lot right there. It's going to be very interesting to jump in and see what it all does. We will be getting the Bungie weekly update later and patch notes for this big patch that we're getting later on, so that could be very interesting. But for now, guys, let me know down below what you think of these changes. There are a hell of a lot there. I hope you have found the video useful though. If you have, a like is always appreciated, and if you're new to the channel, feel free to hit subscribe for a lot more Destiny content. But for now, you guys have an awesome day.